Last week, we began our discussion with entrepreneur, TEDx speaker, and podcast host Oleg Lougheed, and this week we conclude that conversation. So join us now. All right, I want to skip to something new since we're starting the second half of the podcast. Stories typically have a beginning, a middle, and an end. We've talked about the beginning and that inciting incident and that moment where you have a major change and transformation. But then there's the middle. And in A Million Miles in 1,000 Years, Donald Miller writes this about the middle of the personal story. This is when most people give up on their stories. They come out of college wanting to change the world, wanting to get married, wanting to have kids, wanting to change the way people buy office supplies. But they get into the middle and discover it was harder than they thought. They can't see the distant shore anymore, and they wonder if their paddling is moving them forward. None of the trees behind them are getting smaller, and none of the trees ahead are getting bigger. They take it out on their spouses, and they go looking for an easier story. So when you're in the middle of a personal story, and it's hard and boring and seems like it just never ends, how do you stay motivated?
That's a really fascinating question. You know, what's interesting to me is you can talk about the beginning, the middle, and the end, is that I think most of us actually have the tendency, when we're asked about who we are and what is our story, is to start as far back as we can remember. But I just recently wondered, how different would it be? What if I chose to start at the middle, as far as what I'm going through right now? So I think for me, the motivation part, it's interesting because it's something that I've just been able to cultivate throughout my life. And not only understand why I do what I do, but continuing to remind myself that no matter what happens, I'm going to continue believing in myself and look for lessons and takeaways within each one of the experiences that happen. Now, it's obviously a lot easier said than done, without a doubt. And it's something that takes days and days and years to master and understand. But I think this whole motivation part, it's got to come from within. And for me, I don't think it's any different. I think I'm someone that continues to remind myself that whatever it is that I'm going through at the particular moment, whatever the challenge, the setback may be, it's only there to prepare me for the dreams and the person that I envision in becoming.
That's interesting. But you know what?
Think?
You know what, Oleg? One of the things.
What do you think, Amy?
What do I think? I have a thought. Because as a teacher, I look at motivation as a huge factor. I've got students right now that are not motivated to read because, we talked about in our board games and video games that there has to be a level of difficulty to keep the challenge. But when it gets to be too hard, then typically the gamer will just quit. Well, I've seen that with students when things just get too hard or they're too deep in the hole, they stop. And the motivation to continue this personal belief and this idea that I can get to the shore when I'm in the middle kind of ends. And I actually have a personal story on that one, learning how to swim. And my swimming coach would let us swim next to the wall. And okay, granted, I'm probably 5 at this point. And the swim instructor would say, okay, you can swim from the deep end to the shallow end. If you get tired, you can just, rest on the wall. Well, got to swim class one day and there was already a swim class in that lane. And my swim coach believed that we could swim, 5-year-olds, length of the pool from the deep end to the shallow end. No wall. I'm looking at the end of that pool and it looked like it was 6 miles away. There was no way I was going to make it. I had already thought in my head, I'm not going to make it. Mm-hmm. I get about halfway through. There's nothing for me to hold on to. And I start sinking. And my swim coach has to dive in and save me. So that's the kind of thing that I wonder, there is something about having that personal will, that motivation to continue, but there is a point where you're going, I give up, I'm done. So that's the kind of thing that I'm kind of wondering, Oleg, when you have a personal story that does include that darkness and that pain, how do you leverage that story in a way that's helpful to others?
I think I want to jump in here too,
Okay.
because we're, I think in a story, there's a cast of characters. It's
Yes.
not just you.
Yes.
So hopefully when you're in the middle and it seems like you're not going anywhere, there are other people in that boat with you or in boats around you that are helping you out.
The coach coming in and saving you.
Yeah, well, in that instance, or even better, if there's somebody to help you along, you've got friends, you've got family, you've got somebody who's helping you in this story, who's interacting with you. It's not just one of these Jack London stories, Man Against the Wild, or it shouldn't be, right? So I think other people is
Absolutely. It's critical.
Is a big part of it, and maybe too part of it is recognizing in advance that this is likely to happen to you, right?
Okay.
That the middle of the story is the hardest part of the story to write, according to my novelist friends. That the beginning is easy, the end is easy, but to keep it interesting through the middle is the tough part. And if you know that when you're, in your 20s, that the 30s, 40s, and 50s and 60s may take a lot longer to get through and may not all be as exciting as you expect, you kind of prepare yourself a little bit not to be disappointed or not to feel like the boat is sinking when it's not.
What do you think, Oleg?
The thing that comes to mind as you guys were talking about the different characters and the people that become a part of your story, I think what's also important to note in this is that you're not only one character, right? It's okay for you to be a different character at a different phase of your life. So when we talk about the person that you were when you were 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 years old, it's okay for you to reinvent yourself when you were 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. And so the person that you were, and I'll give you a perfect example. So when I was in middle school, when I first came to the States, one of the labels that I was labeled by with a lot of the fellow classmates and some of the teachers was that I was a troublemaker. And the reason why is because when I came here, I was put in the middle of 6th grade. And due to the fact that I didn't know how to speak English well, I thought that the best thing that I could do is to mimic the behavior of some of the classmates around me, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe you jump into the swimming pool and you learn how to swim by looking at what others are doing. And so it just happened to be so that the people that I was mimicking were also the quote-unquote troublemakers within that particular grade. And so what I noticed was that I was slowly becoming in the same pool as that troublemaker, even though at my core, I was not that person. I just simply couldn't tell right from wrong, because once you're exposed to something, it becomes very difficult to break away from it because you don't know if there's anything that's wrong with it, right? And I think what's interesting as far as what you mentioned, as far as the motivation and the difficulty of maintaining it, the reason why I think that happened for me in the classroom setting, the reason why I did not feel motivated when it came to certain subjects or particular aspects of classwork or homework or whatever it was, is because it wasn't directly related to my interest, right? The reason why I excel in today's day and age is because I'm able to align everything with what I'm truly interested in. So I think this aspect of curiosity and asking yourself questions and maintaining that general interest, that's what helps kids motivated. Not even kids, just any human being, I think.
Sure.
And so for me, there was a pivotal moment that happened when I was 9 years old, and I'm jumping around through all this, so if you guys have any questions, please ask. When I was in 9th grade, not 9 years old, I struggled a lot with asking questions or reading out loud. And the reason why is because I didn't feel comfortable with my own voice and my own knowledge of the English language. And so I felt that if I was going to show that quote-unquote skill of mine, that I might get laughed at or whatever else that kids typically do at that particular age. And so I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to try it at all. There was a moment where my 9th grade teacher got up in the middle of class and she said, "There's no such thing as a stupid question. And I'll tell you this, after hearing her say that, it changed my mind completely, and it changed my trajectory completely.
I love that.
It allowed me to understand that we are all on our own individual path when it comes to education and pursuit of knowledge. And the questions that I may be seeking answers to are probably different compared to the questions that you are seeking answers to, but it doesn't make mine wrong and it doesn't make mine right. They just are what they are. And I think that's the biggest thing that I've learned and been able to take away from school in general is the ability to create your own path based on whatever it is that you are interested in.
That's excellent.
Inner motivation and everything, you can still preserve it. You can still maintain it. But I think it all starts from within. It all starts with, what do you want to know?
Yes, and I appreciate the idea of remaining curious and that curiosity to become interested in something or find information about a interest that is personal to you. But listen, Oleg, if you do have a personal story that does include a lot of darkness or pain, how do you leverage that story in a way that's helpful to others? Because, sometimes it is just hard to share that story, or maybe it's hard to receive it. So what would you share? How could you share that personal story so that it would be helpful and advances your life as well?
That is $1 million question. So for me, I was definitely at moments of my life where I experienced similar stuff. And I'll share this one particular moment with you. I was a young kid. I think it was probably 5 or 6, maybe 7 years old. At the time, I was in an apartment with my sister and my mom. My mom ended up coming there drunk, and that is something that my sister did not tolerate at the time. So I have this memory of a fight breaking out in the kitchen while I was watching cartoons in the family room. And the next thing I know is that my sister is chasing my mom with an axe. And I could only imagine what's about to happen. She chased my mom with the axe all the way through the apartment until my mom was able to get into my bedroom and close the door behind her. And the next thing I saw was my sister started hitting the door with the axe, screaming, "I'm going to kill you." Now, there was a moment, there were months, in fact, there were years, when I used to live in that story. I used to live in the darkness. And what I've learned that helped me, and it may not help you, but who knows? You won't know until you try. What helped me was forgiveness, to be completely honest with you. Choosing to forgive my sister for what she had done and choosing to justify that particular moment as a moment where she did the best that she could with the best that she knew. It took a long time to come to that point of realization and understanding, but really every single day choosing to remind myself that I forgive her. And interesting thing about forgiveness is that it's not a destination, it's a process. I think I deal with it every single day. I think there are elements of forgiveness that I haven't experienced before that are going to reappear in my life once again.
Sure.
But I will say this, that when you spoke about living in that darker narrative and coming out of it and choosing to really use that story in a positive way, I think it begins with forgiving. And it could start with many different elements. Forgiving yourself.
Sure.
Forgiving other people.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's really important. And sometimes it's even just forgiving the memory. The memory comes up and it needs to be forgiven. It's, as you said, it's a process. So, Oleg, how would you advise people to navigate the space between being vulnerable and maybe too open when telling their personal stories in a public forum? Because sometimes that can get dicey. I personally have sat in conferences, and the extent at which somebody's sharing information is putting the audience and listeners a little bit on the back of their heels. They're just kind of like, oh, I'm not sure that this is the right forum for that. So what do you think?
To be honest with you, I don't have an answer to that. And the reason why is because I'm someone who chooses to believe that whatever I reveal, I heal. So the more that I choose to dive into these areas, I understand that those are areas that are necessary for me to grow. So I'm someone who chooses to go 100% with everything that I know, because I know that there are lessons to be learned from each and every one of those experiences.
Right.
For other people, it may be a different story. I think everything boils down to, why are you choosing to share that particular story?
There you go. Yep.
What are you trying to gain from it? What are the personal insights that you are trying to gain? What do you want your listeners and your audience to walk away with?
Yeah, I think that's perfect.
And those are probably the biggest questions that we can answer. But at the same time, what I'll tell people, or what I oftentimes tell people, is don't stop yourself short. Because, as I said earlier, whatever the audience may want to know, it may not be the same stuff that you want to know. But I think if you continue to focus on yourself and who you are trying to become and what you're trying to grow in, that's what people want to see. I mean, when we talk about the steps to success or to developing courage, or any of the tips and tricks in how we balance certain things and how other people can do it, to be completely honest with you, I struggle with it. And the reason why is because the 5 steps that I took in developing my courage may take you 100 or it may take you 1. It is completely unique to who you are. So I think the best thing that we can do is we can share a story about how we were able to develop it. And then through listening and hearing my own personal perspective, you might be able to identify your own steps. And then the other thing that I would like to share with all of your listeners is, I think sometimes we get caught in this trap of trying to figure out the whole how when it comes to having our whole story laid out, having all the outcomes. But yet, really, I think the name of the game becomes not knowing the how, but where do you start? Because the how is always going to change. The vision of the how that you have in your mind right now is going to be completely different from the one that you actually live and experience. So really, the question should become, where do you start? When you talk about developing courage to create a platform or a voice for other people, what can you do today? Not tomorrow, not 5 or 6 hours from now, but literally right now, in this particular moment. What question can you ask yourself? What are you trying to create? Why is it important to you? Who are you trying to attract? So I just really wanted to point that out, because I think that oftentimes what I've seen actually prevents us from living out our greatest story, because we get so focused on all these steps and we get overwhelmed and we actually create no action to begin with.
That's kind of like where we started our first episode with you. You know, if you haven't made that first step and you don't have that action, then you may have the Volvo story. What about the end, Oleg? Do you ever think about that? The personal story and what it looks like from the end?
I never have. And the reason why is because I think every day is an opportunity to rewrite or continue your own story. And so I think the end, for me, you know, there's no final destination for this. I don't think there is a point of achievement. I don't think there's any milestone that is going to tell me, hey, this is it. Your story has been written. Because once I hit that point, I know that I can just go even farther. I can rewrite that narrative. I can change. I can pivot. So I think the end probably would have to come with the end of time for me on this planet. And I guess the question that I would have to ask myself at that particular time and phase is, how do I want others to remember me? And the answer to that question, with knowledge that I have today, would have to be, I would want others to remember me as someone who stayed true to himself regardless of what the situation was. Someone who chose to create a space for others, wherever they are along this journey, and someone who truly tried to help other people understand that they are never alone, no matter how difficult the circumstances may be.
All right, last quick question then. What's a metaphor to help us understand how we can tell and leverage our personal stories?
Phew, that is a tough question.
It is.
That's why we ask it.
I think there's so many different elements that go into your personal story.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily a metaphor, but something that I choose to tell myself and remind myself when it comes to the story that I live is a story that my dad instilled within me when I was in 6th grade, asking him for help with my homework. And that is, we were around the dinner table, and he told me something that I still can't forget, and something that's actually become a part of who I am. And that is, he said, "Son, never say you can't do something in life." For me, that's a very, I would say, critical point of who I am, because it just continues to remind me that my story is not finished.
Mm.
And this whole concept of I can't do it is only based on a story that I continue to create within my mind. At the end of the day, let's really think about it. Who's telling you that you can't do it? It might be another person based on their own limitations or something that they haven't personally achieved. And then the other half is you.
That's pretty powerful. It's having the ... at the end of the sentence instead of a period.
Exactly.
I really appreciate you being here. This was an interesting conversation.
Yes. And tell us a little bit about where, if people want to get in touch with you, where can they find you?
I think the best way to find me would be through our website, and that is overcomingout.today. Beyond that, people can find us through any social media platform. And if you are looking to connect with me personally, I would definitely recommend reaching out to me on LinkedIn.
We'll make sure that we have that on our show notes as well. But Oleg, thank you so much for being part of our conversation tonight as we consider how we can transform our personal stories and leverage them into a story of positive ... not just the period at the end of the story. So thank you so much. We appreciate you being here.
Well, thank you for giving me this opportunity and this space to share who I am. And I think what you guys are doing is extremely critical in helping people understand that regardless of where they are and what they've been through, that they're always valued, seen, and supported. And I think that's the most important thing that we can pass on to other people.
Agreed. Well, from one podcast to another, we appreciate you too.
Yeah, thanks, Oleg.
You're welcome at our table. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for joining us at the table tonight for this really heartfelt conversation with Oleg Lougheed about how to tell and leverage your personal story. Join us next week for a truly riveting conversation about artificial intelligence and how the stories that we tell about it affect how we understand and interact with artificial intelligence. And for that, we've got two amazing guests, Dr. Scott Hawley of Belmont University and Dr. John Wyatt of the University College London. You will not want to miss that episode. If you've not subscribed to the Afterword podcast at theafterwordpodcast.com, please take a moment and do that. Then you'll be up on all the latest Afterword information with links to fabulous guest resources. And as always, you are welcome at our table.